Welcome to another episode of Vital DocTalk. And today on the show, we have Dr. Elaina Greenberg, who used to actually live in my home city, Seattle, and now she's in California. Where are you exactly, Dr. Elaina?
I'm in West Los Angeles, West LA.
West Los Angeles. Awesome. And she's been practicing for many years, more than 5. I'll tell you guys that. And
18.
18, exactly. And she's been crushing it for her own private practice by herself. And we were talking about pricing, marketing, all that good stuff. So let's dive right in. Dr. Elaina, why don't you give us the background on, how you got to where you are today?
Oh, well, I mean, I could start from when I was in high school, but
Wherever
we
you
don't
want
have
to
to go
start.
that far. We
However
don't
you
have to
want,
go that far back.
yeah.
But I can say that I've always wanted to go into medicine, but was never interested in Western medicine. And but also have a really strong science background. And I knew that if I did pre-med in undergrad, I wouldn't have to do prerequisites once I figured out what it was that I wanted to do. And I had a friend of a friend who was going to acupuncture school at the time, who I had happened to meet, and they were talking about acupuncture, and I had this visceral response where I had to I wanted to eat their medicine. Like what he was talking about, I somehow had to get that information inside of me. And so I applied for a job at Bastyr University at their research institute because my undergrad was in organic chemistry, and got a job and then started acupuncture school. And 6 months into acupuncture school, I actually had my first acupuncture treatment. So I kind of just flung myself off the cliff because I was so in love with the medicine and the philosophy behind it. And so luckily I liked acupuncture once I got it, and have just continued on that study. So that's the very abbreviated version.
Awesome. And what's been your number one growth strategy? Actually, let's do both. What was the strategy for growing your business that you thought was totally going to work and it completely did not work? And then obviously, and the worst, you could say maybe what you lost the most money on, et cetera, because we've all been there. And then
Right.
on the flip side, obviously, what is your number one growth channel, and how do you make sure that it keeps helping
Sure.
you grow?
So when I first started my practice back in Seattle, or in Renton specifically, I I really was like, okay, every year I'm going to do something different. And so, I got plugged to do different directories. I mean, and so keep this in mind, this is like 2002, 2003, through 2005. And so I didn't have a website. I didn't need a website, or at least I didn't think I needed a website. And I kind of didn't, because the practice really grew much on its own. Through word of mouth. But I was like, every year I'm like, okay, I'm going to try something new. And so one year I did paid for directories, not like the yellow pages, because I knew better than that, but it was like a health directory that was pretty worthless. And then I also did a ad at Bally's, or a 24-hour fitness, whatever the local gym was. I had a little picture of myself and, acupuncture, with my address, but nothing else really. And I never followed up on that. I think had I reached out to the gym and said, hey, can I start doing talks, or can I, somehow move past this little cute picture of me from 20 years ago. And that wouldn't have been such a waste of money, but that was kind of a waste of money.
So we actually had a doctor on the show, and Dr. Hagley, and she actually has that exact strategy you were talking about, where she'll go to a gym and I don't even think she pays. She just says, hey, I'm a member at this gym. What do you guys do to give back? And then they say, oh, we have, French fry Fridays or whatever. Right. And then she says, well, I'd love to, set up a booth once a week. Would you guys be interested? And that's it. And that works. So you were so close.
Smart. I was so close, but just not there yet. Yeah. So that was my biggest waste of time, or money. It wasn't a waste of time. I think if I put time into it, it wouldn't have been such a waste, but I didn't. And then on the flip side, I really have spent time cultivating relationships with referring doctors. I specialize in autoimmune disease, sort of patient X where, you know, someone has been to a million doctors, they can't really find out what's wrong with them, but they still don't feel the way they want to feel, they don't have the energy, they just don't feel well, despite, you know, other avenues that they've tried out. You know, a lot of women's health, specifically like women over 40, and then in mental health. And so, you know, looking at that arena, I would say, okay, well, who are the Western medicine providers that serve this population of people? So rheumatologists, neurologists, GI doctors, OBGYNs, mental health therapists, so whether it's psychiatrists or psychologists, LMFTs, PTs, OTs, NDs, chiros, massage therapists. Like I just sort of like went really like circled around like who are the providers that really funnel and treat this particular population. And so then I reached out to them directly, or I'd find out like kind of who's in my circumference. So it's like, okay, who's in Los Angeles is so neighborhoody. I mean, before COVID, like now you could drive anywhere in Los Angeles and it's kind of amazing. But before COVID, you know, everyone really stuck to their neighborhoods because it's a pain in the ass to get around the city. And so I would really like see who are my local providers, like who's like within a 2 to 3 mile radius of my office, and reached out to them. And, you know, would start with like an introductory letter as to who I am, what I do, and then would follow up with a call to the office and offer a lunch and learn. And so where I would offer, and which is a way to kind of get through like the receptionist is sometimes a gatekeeper.
Yes.
And so to offer a lunch and learn where you bring food, not just for the doctor, but for the entire staff, all the nurses,
Wow.
reception, doctors.
That sounds like that can be super expensive.
You know what? Honestly, like at most, I think it was around $250, which is really initially kind of upfront, like, oh, you know, like.
Is it per practice?
Yeah, per practice.
So, and then how many practices would you have to go to before you start getting referrals? I love that model. Cold email, then you call and say, hey, I'd love to do a lunch and learn. I'd love to buy you guys food. And then,
yeah.
You know,
and then I get, you know, then it gives me an opportunity. So during the lunch and learn is when I have it's not quite a lecture. I prefer it to be much more of a dialogue. I don't like the lecture format is kind of stuffy.
That is the best, you know, I want to, jump in for a second and point at that and say that is 100% the best thing. The best salespeople, the best, marketers or business people, dialogue all the way. Nobody likes being lectured to, right? Nobody likes being presented to, even like, I don't want to watch a presentation. I don't even want to watch a 5-minute presentation. You know, I don't care, you know? So the dialogues are the best. Yeah. And if you could start that conversation with people, that's what's going to produce the most results.
Definitely. And so, you know, I mean, and what I would find is that I just get one patient from them and that more than pays for that lunch.
So did you ever get into a math level where you're like, okay, for every 5 practices I talk to, I get 3 referrals, et cetera, get the customer acquisition costs?
You know, I haven't. I can say that, you know, you have to stay at the doctor's top of mind. So it's one thing to come in and to bring in lunch and to let them know that you're rad and that you think that they're rad. And now you're like having this, you know, relationship, but that relationship has to be cultivated and they have to know when to think of you. And so what I really came up with was that like a 1 sentence, why, like when they need to think of me, like when, cause they'll ask like, well, when should I refer to you? And I'm like, refer to me when you have patients that are underperforming on their prescriptive protocol, or if they don't want any more meds. That's all you have to remember. If you have a patient who comes in, they have something going on, they're already taking a bunch of stuff, but they don't want any more, but they want to feel better, then that's when you think of me. If you have a patient who is doing all right, but still in pain and isn't quite where they want to be, isn't quite living that kind of lifestyle that they want to have, whether they don't have enough energy, they can't eat the kind of foods that they want to eat, or the pain is prohibiting them from things, that's when you think of me. And so 1 sentence.
I love that 1 sentence thing. And then also you're so close. I feel like you're so close to scaling, right? So basically what
does that mean?
So scaling your practice up, right? If you ever wanted to scale it up, and maybe that's not your personal goal, but for the doctors that do want to get that, right? That's the next level where they'd have to say, okay, for every 10 lunch and learns I do, I get X amount of patients. And then for every doctor's, I got it to a point where for every, X amount of, I forgot what the exact numbers were, but it was like for every X amount, I think it was 60-32. So for every 60 people in my network I reach out to for a referral, 30 actually can meet up in the next 2 weeks to actually chat. And on those 30, I get 2 referrals. And it's great for marketing because that can end up into a couple $1,000s, you know? So that's the model where
I get that. But here's the thing is that these doctors, it's a forever relationship as long as they're in practice and you're in practice. And so every month then, I would keep up with that. I would either call and ask for more cards because I've already given out their cards, or I would call and see if they just want to do lunch one-on-one, and then I'll take them out to lunch. And that way I'm starting to build a relationship and a friendship and a professional, I'm blanking on the word, like rapport with these doctors one-on-one, and they're going to refer to me for years.
100%.
So it isn't even just like, and then the other thing that I do and have done to really kind of solidify is, I've been taught about, like, there's like the triangles that they have to trust me, they have to trust the medicine, and I have to stay in their consciousness. Because even though it's a 1-sentence reminder that I'll tell them at my like little lunch pitch, like it's not there all the time. And so I'll send studies about how acupuncture is helpful for insomnia, how, different herbs can be helpful and not be contraindicated with certain medications, or how, different acupuncture can be helpful for rheumatoid arthritis, and all from like PubMed. So I try to find like really good studies that I'll send them like once a month of like, hey, you might not have seen this. Here's something on acupuncture and ulcerative colitis. Here's something for, acupuncture and moxibustion on like breech presentation or whatever, like whoever I'm sending it to, I try to make it a little bit easier for myself to like send the same studies, and that way I keep track of the studies that I've sent, so I'm not sending the same thing. And
I love that.
Yeah.
That is a fantastic idea, because we've done something similar as well for our vendors or referral partners, and we try to do a quarterly newsletter type of thing.
Yeah.
Like, hey, here's how have you been doing? Here's what so I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. And they'll appreciate it. And, and I've gotten feedback from the receptionist. And so then I'll go in and, just stop by, and like over the holidays, I bring like pears to all the doctors. Like they really like the fruit because they feel like they get enough like candy and sugar and awful stuff, and that I just can't, all through grad school, I used to work reception, and I feel like it's such an undervalued position in a doctor's office. But man, like reception is like where it's at, because they're the tone of your office. Like if you have a really like lame person on the phone, like that's awful. Like you need to have like good people up front, and they need to feel respected. And I get that. And it's a hard job. And
let's acknowledge them for a second as well. The reception is where the experience starts and ends.
Yeah.
And most of the time that's how people remember. They remember the beginning and the ending.
Yeah,
so, definitely.
Absolutely. Like reception is like, so, you really want to have good people up there and to really treat them well. And so that's always something that I carry with me. When I go to the doctor's offices, I know the front office name. I usually oftentimes will get a chance to know their kid's name and get to, or what they like, or talk about like how awesome their nails are, or like their kid, or like if they've been to a Beyonce show, or, like
very genuine.
Just a connection.
Yeah. I think the audience also is going to come through to the audience that you're a very genuine person. And that's what really helps others connect with you and build relationships. So I love that. And I feel like we've gotten really, really tactical tips on, hey, first cold email, then call them, then offer like a lunch and learn type of thing, then meet the staff, talk to the doctors. And then after a while, you'll know who your real referral partners are, and you can hone in on that audience. Yeah. What I started doing is the metrics part, right? Whenever I started consulting with other doctors, and that's what we used to really look in at. I think Dr. Jessica Wendling was like my second one, and that's what I had her do. And she'd go and like, here are my top 5, here are my top 10 referral partners that actually refer me the most business. You make sure you really stay in contact with them. So I love that model. And it sounds like Dr. Elaina, you can grow like as much as you want with that model. So that works awesome. What have been your biggest challenges to date? Like, especially during COVID, you know, a lot of doctors, obviously they've been impacted. What would your tips be for them?
Right. Gosh, I don't know if I have anything that they haven't already heard. I feel like in the first weeks of COVID, when so many of us, I mean, I shuttered my practice for about 2 months, the physical practice. And within a week, there was like, how to COVID proof your practice and how to do telemedicine and blah, 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 like all this stuff. And it was so fear driven. And I was in such a state of fear myself of just like, what happened of all like the scenarios that I've created and contingency plans of aliens popping out of the ground. I never considered that like I was going to have to like close my doors for 2 months. And so, you know, I did move to a telemedicine format and it was okay. I learned really quickly that I don't like doing telemedicine in my bedroom. You know, go figure. It's a boundary that is, but it was like, because we have such a small house and there's so many people, you know, it's like, that was like the place until my husband was like, why don't you just go into your office to do it? Nobody's there. You're not bringing anyone in. And so once I moved the telemedicine to my office space, that made a big shift. Cause it just felt so good to be in my treatment room. And there was a boundary that wasn't being crossed. Like my patients were not in my bedroom. So
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, that if that insight right there, a lot of doctors don't talk about that. What I'm referring to, by the way, when I said that's awesome, the insight that you can go into your office to do your telemedicine. A lot of doctors, they don't talk about that going into, I think I had maybe one other doctor mentioned it, but yeah. I think that that boundary is very, very important. Like I've been working from home forever and it can be a huge challenge. So I actually got an office space as well. Right. However, with COVID, my office space got shut down. So now I'm like stuck at home and it's still fine. Like, you know, cause I do work from home majority of the time, but I think even every once in a while, if you can step away from your home and have that mental barrier, we don't really talk about that. And I think it is important to, you know,
in a room that is basically the designated.
Like if you have an exercise room, that is where you should exercise. And whenever you get there, your body and your mind will just start getting into the zone, you know?
Yeah, so, it's muscle memory.
Yep, exactly. I definitely think it's muscle memory.
There's, you know, it's like when I come to my office, there's things that just sort of like start moving that when I'm at my house, I'm just sort of like, you know, having to take a minute to think and then hearing my son's like video game on the other side of the wall. It's like, yeah. It's a lot harder. So I think that would be the one thing. The other thing is that I found ways to help patients treat themselves. So whether it's through like these phototherapy patches or sending herbs directly to their house or getting, you know, signing up with a company that will ship them supplements directly to their house, and to get that flow going was really helpful too, because people were really searching, you know, for vitamins and supplements, and to like, okay, here, you don't even have to leave.
For sure. I think that digitally now we've got an extra step into the future of, you know, how things are going to start looking like, you know, now that everybody can stay home and maybe do some digital therapy is what I think I just created that term, digital therapy, you know, and now they have to be a bit more self-reliant. However, I think as things open up, then we can start going back into that face-to-face. I think nothing's going to beat that. You said you had to shut your practice down for 2 weeks.
I didn't have to. So in California, like, you know, we are considered like essential providers. Acupuncturists were primary care doctors. I chose to because I didn't have enough information to feel comfortable seeing patients to know that I was going to keep them safe or that I wouldn't be bringing something home to my family. And so once enough time had passed that I was really able to, kind of suss out what's the fear and fervor and like what's the reality and what all these numbers actually mean. Like once there was enough time, and it is still so new, but I started seeing patients again in my office last month, and it's been a slow build back, but it's been so great. And it's been so great. And so that really solidified to me that how much I love being with patients and being with people one-on-one versus like this telemedicine format. But it did get my brain starting to think about how to, work with people that aren't just directly in front of me. And so that's definitely been something that I'm exploring.
What was that like being, or, you obviously you weren't forced to shut down, but you did take the 2 weeks you closed down. What was that like when you were alone for 2 weeks, or your
2
practice
months.
was 2 months? Yeah. So that's huge, right? So I would be, missing a big part of this interview if I didn't ask that question. What was that like? What were some of the things that helped? What were some things that didn't help?
Cardio exercise helped. I sweat a ton every day. Like I just kind of had to like spin my wheels. I had to move into mom mode, and I had to move into like mom teacher mode. And I suddenly became a teacher of a 2nd grader and a 6th grader. And 6th grader was much more independent than the 2nd grader, but that really took over a big part of, my kids are going to be okay if my husband and I are okay. If we're like freaking out and unstable and just like,
it's going to resonate with them.
They're going to feel it too. And so, we really had to, as a couple, as a team, as parents, to, set the tone. And luckily my husband is so, he's just a rock. He's just like totally stable, like super chill. Like I'm like the mosquito that can like buzz around, and he'll just like have this really stable presence. And so he was really grounding for all of us. And so I just moved into kid mode. And then at the same time, when I had moments to myself, really had a kind of like an existential crisis, like who am I? Like, who am I now that I'm not practicing acupuncture? Because I was doing that before my husband. I was doing that before my kids, like that was and is so much of who I am and so much of what I love, that the idea of not going back to it and spending decades, becoming who I am and creating what I have, and just seeing it, like March 13th was the last day I saw patients at a full capacity, was really humbling. And so, I found gratitude in things that I never even realized that I took for granted. Like I'd see our teacher's face on a Zoom call, and I would get misty-eyed because it was just some sense of normal. Like all these things that were normal are suddenly not normal. And so I sat with a lot. It was, and it still is an interesting time, but I feel like it's coming back. So.
That was a deep experience right there. That was a lot. Went through a lot of stuff. And I think, the doctors out there who are still kind of slowly reopening, you can use this as an opportunity to, as Dr. Elaina was talking about, to find yourself, and not just see yourself maybe as a doctor, and remember that you are, an impact around or you make an impact on everybody that's around you. And so, maybe use this time to write that book, is what I always like to say, that you always wanted to write or whatever, right? But find that new path and that new direction to come back stronger. Yeah. So what would be, let's say a doctor's listening to this podcast, what would be their one takeaway that you think they should implement into their own personal life that would help them in their practice?
I would say to not be afraid to speak your true voice, to, the veil has been lifted on so many things in the past recent in the recent past, and to lift the veil on yourself, to like, if there's something that needs to be said that's in your heart and that's true, is to say it, and to not try to be someone else, or to not try to like be who you think your patients want you to be, but just to be who you are.
And I love that because I think people are going to be able to tell how vulnerable you are, Dr. Greenberg, and it's refreshing for I think a lot of people when the other person's vulnerable and they don't have that mask on. But what would be some more kind of like practical, not practical, like some more tactical ways to practice that vulnerability? Do you do it consciously? Do you meditate? What would be kind of like a one easy step to start taking that mask off?
And I do meditate. I also know that it's kind of like an eye roll when you tell patients, oh, or people like, why don't you meditate? It's just like, you know, like, I don't want to meditate. Like, okay. I would say that, you know, maybe to practice writing, or it's like if you have a like a blog, or if you have something that you send out to your patients, to use your voice in it. It doesn't have to be so clinical. People like clinical, and it's important to give important information. I mean, think about comedians. Like, they can bring up the most and make such critiques and accurate critiques on our society, and at the same time still make us laugh. Whereas if you were to just give someone like all these bullet points about racism, like, while it's important, we have to know it, like, comedians have a way of breaking barriers and to make you aware of things through humor. And it can be really profound and really changing. And so I think what I would suggest that would be practical is to find your voice and find your own sense of humor and let that out, because it makes the unpalatable so much more palatable.
I like that. Yeah, I definitely agree. You know, which is why I do the podcast where it is, and I don't wear a suit or whatever, because that's just my personal philosophy, though. And, you know, there's two mindsets, but I think we're definitely living in a more modern world, because when you go home, even that today is seen on social media and Twitter, et cetera. So you can't really take the business suit off and on and, you know, switch between those masks. I think there's a lot more holistic approach. So that's awesome, as well. There's that word again. So Dr. Elaina, where should people find you? What should they check out? Now's the time. You made it through the interview. You did a great job.
Well, you can go to my website. It's elainagreenberg.com. So it's ELAINAGREENBERG.com. Or you can find me. I'm very reluctant to social media, but I do have an Instagram account for my business that is just Elaina G LAC. And yeah, find me on my website. It's got my phone number, it's got my email. You can reach out that way, and some more information about me and about things that I find interesting. And I just genuinely really love people, so reach out.
That's fantastic, guys. And thank you so much for listening to another episode of Vital Doc Talk.